So let's go ahead and let's talk through this piece of socialization. You can think about this as socialization or enculturation. This is going to kind of help us see, like, how is this happening? So, you'll see on the blue, it says in the beginning, then we'll go through first socialization, institutional and cultural socialization, results, and then change of direction, but also the core. So let's dive in the beginning. So when you're born in a world with no mechanics in place. There's no blame, there's no consciousness, no guilt, no choice. Um, it's just it's so just to think about this, right? Any child who's born is born into a group that has a language. Isn't it amazing that a baby that grows up in China speaks Chinese? And if that baby grew up in an English speaking world, they'd speak English. If they were in a Hindi speaking world, they'd speak Hindi. Like, how amazing is that, right? So think about that beauty of the openness. Now, it's not a blank slate. That's a whole philosophical conversation. But again, there's an innocence. So I'm going to say there's this beautiful innocence that we're born with, and there's no limited or misinformation. There's no biases. There's no stereotype. There's no prejudice. There's no history, habit, or tradition that happens when you're born. You're born innocent. First socialization is by the people that we love and trust. We're taught by, on a personal level, by parents, relatives, teachers, peers, mentors, the shapers of our experiences, our norms, our values, our roles, our rules, the models of ways of being, sources of our dreams. It's reinforced by the group affiliation, who you hang out with, and they were taught the same message. Okay, so that's that first socialization. And so, again, on 12, we want you to have an opportunity to be able to reflect on this, right? So, again, you can come back to this and take a look and think about that. Like, who were those people who were part of your first socialization? Then, as we get older, it's reinforced and bombarded with messages from our institutions, our cultural practices, churches, businesses, schools, song lyrics, television, language, our legal system, our media, mental health, medicine. It's conscious and unconscious. And these perceptions become so normalized, you do not question the way things are. It's just the socialization, right? And look at all of those factors that go into it, right? You think about media, you think about medicine. I mean, these things are just, it's all in their school, right? So again, it's this whole piece of that. So again, take some time to really consider, where did you receive those messages and from whom? Again, institutional, cultural pieces. Right? So again, think about those things. And I mean, it really is amazing when you start listening to songs and um, you watch shows and you start watching it from these lenses, particularly like a cross-cultural lens, and you're like, wow, that is so interesting, of like what is emphasized, what's important. Okay. So that's page 13. So just think about those early, your innocence, you take up the information very innocently, you believe everybody around you, right? And we all want to fit in. And there's enforcements, right? So there's rewards and punishment, there's supports and stigma. You receive positive messages when you ask in accordance to what you're taught, even if it isn't the truth. You receive negative messages when you question the status quo. There's enforcements and sanctions, there's stigma and reward, there's punishment and privilege, there's persecution and discrimination versus empowerment, right? So these enforcements are happening constantly, right? And what does that look like? Well, it looks like the results. You start internalizing those feelings and social standing. If you're normal, there's this confidence, security, autonomy, access to opportunity. But if you're feeling abnormal, there's shame, there's silence, there's isolation, there's anger and stress and barriers to achieving. When it gets really bad, there's dissonance, silence, anger, feeling dehumanized, guilt, collusion, ignorance, self hatred, stress, distorted realities, uh, violence, inconsistency, uh, crime, internalizations of power. So this is what happens, right? So again, just think about these things. What were the enforcements that you experienced? What made you either go along or rebel? How did those situations or expectations make you feel? Now, this is why when I do this work, I always want to talk about our emotions and the spaces, right? And so, again, because we're in this setting and we're in a training and we're virtual, we're not having that pressure of being with each other and having to manage our fronts. But we want to have you have the tools to take this stuff deeper and to see a little bit deeper and to really consider this process. But remember to check in with your bodies and breathe. And sometimes, if you're not used to hearing people's stories, it can be very overwhelming. We can get flooded, or we can put up a wall, right? But we do that with ourselves as well. So go ahead and just remember as you're doing this work to look at that. Because in our lives, there becomes this point where when we start learning this stuff and we start seeing this, we really have a choice, this action of continuing back and perpetuating bias, stereotype, norms, history, habits, and traditions. We might not do anything. We don't want to make waves. We may even promote the status quo. And that's the cycle of socialization. But we can break the cycle with a cycle of liberation by changing, raising consciousness, interrupting, educating, taking a stand, questioning, and reframing. And so, again, with the horrific scenes of George Floyd's death, that raised consciousness for a lot of people. Some of us knew about it, a lot of people didn't. And it interrupted a cycle and it caused a lot of disruption. And that disruption and that ripple is still being felt today. And George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, there's so many folks along that way that make us change our consciousness. And so again, those are our two pieces, but you do want to really, really go deeper and think about why do we go along with what we're taught socially, right? And you see in this bottom box, um, the biologic need to belong equals survival. Okay. This is really, really powerful. We create groups because we need to be in groups to survive. Everybody has a component of not seeing that common humanity, but identifying with the group that's part of your survival. And this is not good or bad, it's just part of the human condition. And that's where Maslow's transcendence is, self transcendence is, where do we go to a larger sense of ourselves and we as humanity, right? So we all know what it feels like to be isolated. We're also scared of what we don't know. Those are parts of it, right? So the core of all of this cycle of socialization, the core of it is our fear, our ignorance, our insecurity, and our confusion. And, again, all the work that I do keeps pointing me back to when you're uncomfortable and there's discomfort, go towards the discomfort, don't go away from it. When there's trauma, go towards it, not away from it. When there's pain, go towards it, not away from it, right? Because the whole idea of liberation and being free, you have to look at, what did I not know? I was ignorant. That ignorance can actually be born out of innocence of not knowing. It can be born out of insecurity or confusion. But at the heart of it all is always fear, right? So think about that and just think about that opportunity of not judging ourselves or judging others for how they think, because this is that core of fear that we all have.